What we're looking at now is what are the determinants of price elasticity of demand, or in other words, what things determine how responsive quantity demanded will be when the price changes. For example, if the price of petrol goes up, quantity demanded will decrease for sure. That's the law of demand. But this decrease in quantity demanded will be very, very small. Why? If the price of Coke goes up, there'll be a relatively large decrease in quantity demanded. Why? Well, the reasons are listed below. We see two of them, and there are some more on the next couple of slides. So the first and maybe the most important determinant is the number of substitutes. If the good has lots of substitutes, like Coke, if the price of Coke goes up, well, consumers just switch to a cheaper alternative, and there's such a big number to choose from. In the case of petrol, if the price goes up, well, there are not many alternatives to petrol. Most cars in New Zealand run on petrol, so people haven't got much choice. So demand for petrol would be inelastic, while the demand for Coke would be elastic. The second determinant is the good a necessity, a good that we need, or is it a luxury, a good that we don't need? So taking petrol again, petrol is a necessity. It's something that we have to run our motor vehicles, and so if the price goes up, there'll be a relatively small decrease in quantity demanded. However, an overseas holiday is a luxury item. We don't need to go for a holiday overseas. We could have a holiday in New Zealand, for example, or we could have a holiday at home and just read books, watch movies. So if the price of an overseas holiday goes up for whatever reason, could be the value of the New Zealand dollar goes down or whatever, if the price goes up, there'll be a very big response in the number of people wanting to travel. So quantity demanded will decrease relatively more. So there we'll say demand is elastic. The third determinant is related a little bit to necessity and luxury. Is the good expensive or cheap? Expensive goods, like overseas holidays, luxury items if you like, they take up a large percentage of our spending. So any increase in price or decrease in price, there is going to be a very sensitive response. Quantity demanded will increase or decrease relatively more from the price change. If the good is cheap, like it's a necessity, for example, I'll use the example of a lighter that maybe once a year we buy a couple of lighters at the supermarket, so we spend maybe $2 or $3 on them, or $4 once a year. So that spending takes up a very, very tiny percentage of our total spending. So even if the following year we go in and we see the price has gone up by 100%, it would have little effect on our decision to buy that lighter because it's so cheap. Fourthly, is the good durable or non-durable? Durable goods are goods that last a long time. And so if the price changes, if the price, for example, goes up, it's unlikely people will go ahead and buy that good immediately. They can wait because it's durable. But if they have to replace it, they have to replace it. But generally, we say durable items tend to be more responsive to changes in price, while non-durable items or single-use goods as they're known, like food, tend to be more unresponsive, in other words, more inelastic to price changes. And finally, is the good habit or forming addictive? Cigarettes are. And so smokers of cigarettes, every time the price goes up, they say, oh, I must cut back. And it usually has it doesn't last long, and they're back smoking as much as they were before. So price increases tend to cause a relatively smaller decrease in quantity demanded because people are addicted. So it's inelastic. And of course, government regulation is the final one. If the government makes a law saying you must do something, it's compulsory. So if the price goes up, you haven't got much choice. You have to buy it anyway because the government by law says you have to. So demand will be inelastic. So let's have a look at why demand for bike helmets is inelastic. The primary reason it is because the government requires by law that everyone use them. In other words, they're compulsory and they become a necessity. Secondly, they have no close substitutes as they have to meet certain safety standards. So, for example, cheap helmets sold on the internet in China are not illegal in New Zealand because they don't meet the required safety standards. So there are really no close substitutes. And thirdly, they're relatively cheap. I mean, you might spend $40 or $50 on it, but you only would spend that amount of money over quite a few years, really. You would expect a helmet to be quite durable, to last a long time. So they take a relatively small percentage of income, and so you would say relatively cheap. Another method businesses use to increase total revenue is known as price discrimination. And remembering the business is trying to increase total revenue, so it wants to know whether it should increase or decrease its price. If demand is elastic, a price decrease will lead to an increase in total revenue. An increase in price will lead to a decrease, so they won't want to increase their price but rather decrease. And if demand is inelastic, the seller will increase prices in order to increase total revenue. So, price discrimination, how does it work? Well, sellers, what they do is separate or distinguish different markets for their goods and services. So, for example, they notice that certain periods of the day there's a lot more demand for their product than others. This would be the case of bus services and airlines particularly, and so they charge different prices at different times. For example, cheaper weekend prices called off-peak rates when fewer people use the service, or they put their prices up at peak time when everyone wants to use the service, so demand there is much more inelastic. Sellers can also charge different prices to different groups of buyers. For example, those on lower incomes, like students, retired people, are more responsive to price decreases, to discounts, while higher prices tend to be charged to business class travellers because their demand is more inelastic. They have to travel on a certain date, and of course the business is often paying for it. So to summarize, use this text above to complete the missing words. So if the aim of the firm is to maximize sales, the firm will offer price discounts when demand is relatively elastic. For example, during off-peak times, or to buyers who have limited income or lower incomes, demand is more responsive to price decreases. Therefore, decreasing the price will increase total revenue. Conversely, firms will increase their price during peak travel periods or to buyers who have higher incomes in order to maximize total revenue from sales. Bus fares are higher at peak time because demand is more inelastic. In this way, firms' revenue will increase. People must get to work or school, so even if the price is higher, they are willing to use the bus service. Thus, fares therefore are lower at off-peak times because demand is more elastic. People can find alternative methods of transport. They may choose to use their car as there's less chance of traffic jams. The seller will therefore decrease the price in order to increase total revenue. So to summarize, at off-peak time, price elasticity of demand will be less than 1, therefore inelastic, and prices will increase. At off-peak time, price elasticity of demand will be greater than 1, because demand therefore is elastic, so sellers will decrease their prices in order to increase revenue. Now, the last thing we want to look at about price elasticity of demand is that even though the demand curve is a straight line, elasticity is different as you go up and down the curve. Remind yourself also that price elasticity of demand doesn't measure the gradient of the curve, so it's not constant. So here we can see that at the midpoint of all straight line demand curves, price elasticity is equal to 1. In other words, it's unitary. So mathematically, of course, as you go up above that point, the coefficient must be greater than 1. And this is fairly logical when you think about it, because as the good becomes more and more expensive, buyers are more sensitive to changes in price, and so demand becomes more elastic. When the price is below 100, as you move down the demand curve, that the good becomes cheaper, and it's more inelastic because the buyers are less sensitive to changes in price because the good is cheaper. They're going to be spending less on it, and so they are less responsive to any price change, whether increase or decrease. Don't forget to look closely at these presentations by Stephen King, a professor at Monash University. These presentations are relatively short, around about 10 minutes, and really worthwhile watching because he goes through each of the models carefully and thoroughly. And so these are an excellent backup, an excellent alternative presentation to the ones I'm giving you.